150 years ago, the territory of the Russian Empire decreased by 1.5 million square kilometers, losing its largest overseas possession, Russian America, as all Russian settlements on the northwestern coast of America were called from 1741 to 1867. A huge part of the North American continent, which included not only Alaska but also the Pacific coast almost to California, was sold to the United States on March 30, 1867. However, for a long time, these lands in the United States were considered incapable of supporting their own administration and only became the 49th U.S. state on January 3, 1959. In Russia, people tried not to recall Russian America after the year of its sale. To this day, many rumors surround the deal. Allegedly, Alaska was never sold at all, but only leased to the U.S. for 99 years, and when the lease expired in 1957, Khrushchev supposedly gave the land to the U.S. as a gift. Others insist that no transfer agreement was ever signed either by the Russian Empire or the USSR, and that the peninsula was simply taken for free. There are also claims that the sale should be considered invalid because the ship carrying the gold payment sank. Many in both Russia and the US are convinced that it was Catherine the Great who sold Russian America, although in fact the deal was carried out under Emperor Alexander II. Be that as it may, Alaska remains shrouded in mystery. Since for a long time it was customary in Russia to criticize the Tsars as narrow-minded and incompetent, the concession to America was presented as a secret blunder, supposedly influenced by hidden forces. This was convincing. What a piece of land was lost, and what riches with it? And to this day, the question remains unclear to many: why and how was it sold? Was it foolishness, short-sightedness, intrigue, or something else? So why did they sell Russian America? The main reason was perhaps voiced in a letter from Grand Duke Constantine, head of Russia's naval staff. The Tsar's younger brother wrote to Foreign Minister Gorchakov. It occurred to me that we ought to take advantage of the present surplus of funds in the Treasury of the United States and sell them our North American colonies. This sale would be very timely, for we must not deceive ourselves. The United States, constantly striving to round off its possessions and wishing to dominate North America entirely, will take these colonies from us, and we will be unable to regain them. Meanwhile, these colonies bring us very little benefit, and their loss would not be too painful. The letter was dated spring 1857, meaning the idea of selling Alaska had arisen 10 years before the actual event. In fact, the territory had already once been offered up for a fictitious sale, retroactively, during the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856. Out of fear that the powerful British fleet might seize the remote, undefended colony. At that time, Anglo-Russian relations were defined by geopolitical rivalry and often open hostility. Immediately to the east of Alaska lay British Canada, formerly the territory of the Hudson's Bay Company. After a British naval attempt to land troops in Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, the possibility of a direct clash between the two nations in America became real. In 1854, the U.S. government, wishing to prevent the British Empire from occupying Alaska, proposed a fictitious, temporary, 3-year sale of all lands and property of the Russian American Company. The aim was to deter the British. If they attacked the Russian territories, they would inevitably trigger a new Anglo-American conflict, something London wanted to avoid. Although the deal was approved, it was never executed, as the Russian American Company managed to reach an agreement with the Hudson's Bay Company. In case of open war between Russia and Britain, both companies pledged not to take military action against each other's American holdings. Although that fictitious deal was annulled, the idea of a real sale to the U.S. did not die and gained momentum after the Crimean War. Washington expressed interest, though Russia initially refused. Still, the risk was clear: the colony's neighbor was a dangerous one. In 1821, Tsar Alexander I had issued a decree extending Russia's American borders to the 51st parallel, forbidding foreign ships from approaching within 100 miles and prohibiting trade with Russian colonists and natives. This angered the U.S., whose Secretary of State John Quincy Adams declared America would contest Russia's right to any territorial possession on our continent. Ultimately, Russia retreated, limiting itself to the actual areas controlled by the Russian American Company. By then, the U.S. had already been rapidly expanding its borders. Buying Louisiana from Napoleon in 1803 and later annexing vast portions of Mexico. The 1823 Monroe Doctrine further asserted U.S. dominance over the continent. Although relations between Russia and the US were outwardly friendly, the potential threat to Alaska remained. Grand Duke Constantine insisted it was wiser to sell than risk losing the colony by force. There were also practical reasons. In 125 years since its discovery, Russian America remains sparsely settled and underdeveloped. Only 600 to 800 Russians lived there, mostly in small coastal settlements. The colony's economy, based on fur, was in decline. Sea otters had been nearly wiped out, and other furs had to be bought from natives. The colony barely survived through coal, fish, and ice exports to California. Russia, meanwhile, was bankrupt after the Crimean War. It had no resources to develop or defend Alaska, especially against hostile natives supplied with weapons by American and British traders. The colony was strategically indefensible. Even its capital, Novoarkhangelsk, could be burned to the ground by a native uprising or foreign attack. Thus, Alexander II finally agreed. On December 28, 1866, he signed the decision to sell. The negotiations were kept secret to avoid embarrassment. Russian envoy Eduard Stoeckel discreetly arranged matters in Washington so that the initiative appeared to come from the U.S. In March 1867, a treaty was signed. Russia sold Alaska for $7.2 million, 11 million gold rubles, roughly 5 cents per hectare. At the time, even Americans considered the price too high. They called it Seward's folly and a box of ice. But Russia, relieved to have gained unexpected revenue, accepted the deal. From today's perspective, the sale looks absurd. The U.S. later extracted vast wealth from Alaska: gold, oil, and fish worth thousands of times the purchase price. Strategically, Alaska gave the U.S. dominance in the North Pacific and access to Asia. For Russia, however, the sale was inevitable. The colony was unprofitable, indefensible, and a liability in the face of British expansion. Selling it peacefully to the U.S. was far better than losing it by force. Thus, while the sale was not a triumph for Russia, it was one of the greatest bargains in American history.